In the spring of 1942, Japan's capital, Tokyo, enjoyed a confidence born of vast geography and overwhelming early success in the Pacific War. The city was considered strategically immune to any attack from the United States military. Japanese military planners confidently believed the thousands of miles of ocean formed an unbreachable protective barrier. There was no land-based American airfield close enough to launch a sustained bomber strike against the Japanese home islands. The longest-range American bombers of the day simply lacked the fuel capacity for the arduous round-trip journey. This absolute geographical security allowed the Japanese High Command to focus their attention and resources on expanding their perimeter further into the South Pacific. They felt secure enough to leave their major industrial and governmental centers largely undefended against aerial assault. The citizens of Tokyo went about their daily lives under the psychological reassurance that the war was a distant affair, far from their shores. This widely held belief in their nation's inviolability became a crucial psychological asset for the entire Japanese war machine. The confidence was so profound that it bordered on strategic complacency among the highest levels of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy. Japan had launched the first blow and was convinced that the United States was far too damaged and geographically constrained to effectively retaliate. Their military doctrines were entirely predicated on the assumption that they controlled the initiative and the operating distance of the war. No one in the Japanese command structure could possibly conceive of a plan that would bridge that enormous distance in a single, audacious strike. The entire nation had built an intellectual and defensive fortress around its capital city, protected not by guns, but by thousands of miles of unforgiving water. This fortress of thought was a greater shield than any anti-aircraft battery they could have deployed. The very idea of an American plane successfully penetrating this defense was simply not a variable in their wartime equation. It was this very profound, deeply held certainty that American ingenuity was determined to exploit. The psychological victory of breaking this belief would be worth more than any physical damage the bombs could inflict. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was a masterstroke of tactical planning and a devastating psychological blow to the United States. It instantly dragged a deeply divided America into the full horror of a global conflict. The shock and anger resulting from the destruction of the Pacific Fleet could not be overstated, demanding a powerful response. Sunken battleships and the loss of life generated a nationwide cry for immediate and decisive retribution against the Japanese aggressors. American military leaders and politicians understood that a passive, defensive war would be catastrophic for both domestic and international morale. The United States was in desperate need of a victory, a symbol of defiance that could penetrate the enemy's triumphant narrative. Allied nations were watching closely, needing assurance that America was not crippled and was prepared to fight back fiercely. The long list of early Japanese victories across the Pacific had created an atmosphere of pessimism that required a dramatic reversal. The sheer audacity of striking the American fleet at anchor demanded an equal, unexpected, and shocking counterpunch. A mere engagement at sea would be insufficient to repair the profound wound inflicted upon the national psyche. The only effective response had to be a visible, physical attack on the Japanese homeland itself, proving it was not a sanctuary. This deep-seated need for vengeance and psychological warfare gave rise to the most daring military proposal of the early war. The public demanded action, and the president knew that restoring faith in the American war effort was absolutely paramount. The political imperative to retaliate became the driving force behind the mission's relentless planning and execution. It was not just about military objectives, but about the restoration of American pride and the global perception of its power. Every subsequent action in the Pacific in those dark early months was filtered through the lens of answering the devastation of that fateful Sunday morning. The immense pressure to strike back was mounting exponentially with every passing day of Japanese expansion. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was acutely aware that the war could be won or lost on the battlefield of public and soldier morale. Following the string of Japanese victories, the American home front felt vulnerable and desperately needed a morale boost. Roosevelt knew that to simply trade blows in the distant Pacific would not satisfy the national hunger for revenge. He issued a clear, uncompromising directive to his military chiefs: devise a plan to bomb Japan as soon as possible. This command was a challenge to the entire logistics and technical capabilities of the U.S. military. The demand immediately superseded all conventional restraints concerning range, safety, and operational feasibility. It was a political move designed to send a powerful message to the American people, to the Allies, and most importantly, to the enemy. The military planners were initially bewildered by the near impossible nature of the president's directive. Hitting Tokyo required a forward base that simply did not exist within the bomber's operational range. The problem could not be solved by building new airfields. It had to be solved by inventing a completely new operational concept. This is where the ingenious, unorthodox idea of combining naval transport with a medium-range bomber first took hold. The pressure from the White House was the unrelenting, motivating factor that drove the plan forward at breakneck speed. Every logistical and engineering obstacle was considered secondary to the successful fulfillment of the president's vision. The very fate of the mission rested on finding a pilot and engineer capable of turning this desperate political will into military reality. The sheer audacity required for the task made the selection of the mission's commander a choice of singular importance. Roosevelt's insistence on a swift, retaliatory strike directly led to the selection of James H. Doolittle to lead this seemingly impossible mission. The president's determination was the foundational layer of the entire project, ensuring that the necessary resources were allocated without question. The task of transforming the president's demand into an achievable military operation fell to the celebrated aviator, Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle. Doolittle was an engineer, a pilot, and a man renowned for his willingness to take calculated, extreme risks in the service of aviation progress. The core problem was quickly identified as bridging the vast gap between the farthest operational carrier launch point and the Japanese coast. The solution came in the form of a revolutionary concept: launching a land-based, twin-engine medium bomber from a short carrier deck. The bomber chosen for this audacious feat was the B-25 Mitchell, selected for its relatively compact size, long range, and rugged durability. No aircraft of this size and weight had ever been successfully flown off the deck of an aircraft carrier. The carrier deck offered only a fraction of the runway length required for a standard B-25 takeoff at maximum combat load. This meant Doolittle's team faced both an operational challenge and a major aeronautical engineering problem that had to be solved simultaneously. They began conducting highly secretive tests at a naval air station, simulating the dimensions of a carrier deck on a runway. The initial test flights proved that an empty B-25 could indeed be launched, but the bomber would need extreme modifications to carry enough fuel and ordnance. Doolittle meticulously calculated the absolute minimum distance required for liftoff, factoring in the crucial headwind provided by the carrier's speed. The whole plan was a magnificent and terrifying exercise in aeronautical precision and physics pushed to their absolute limits. The idea was to sneak within striking distance, launch the raid, and then continue on a one-way flight to friendly airfields in China. This bold, unprecedented naval-air collaboration was the brilliant key that unlocked the geographical fortress of Japan. The combination of Doolittle's technical acumen and his personal courage made him the indispensable leader of this perilous endeavor. The standard B-25 Mitchell bomber was simply not built for the incredible 2,400-mile flight required for the raid. Engineers under Doolittle's supervision began a radical and meticulous overhaul of the aircraft, stripping them down to their bare essentials. Every ounce of non-critical weight was removed to maximize the plane's fuel-carrying capacity for the extended journey. The heavy, power-operated lower gun turret was a particular target, removed entirely to shave hundreds of pounds from the bomber. In a clever piece of psychological warfare, wooden poles painted black were mounted in the tail section to simulate machine guns. This visual deception was a low-cost, low-weight way to discourage any potential following Japanese fighter attacks. The most crucial modification was the installation of large auxiliary fuel tanks in the bomb bay, the lower fuselage, and even in the catwalk. These extra fuel bladders effectively doubled the operational range of the B-25s, transforming them into specialized flying fuel tanks. The bomb racks were also redesigned to carry 4 500-pound bombs each, including incendiaries to target the highly flammable Japanese cities. Crews also received special navigation equipment and extra charting gear for the complex one-way flight path over open water and then land. Every crew member was issued a 5-gallon can of gasoline to manually refuel the wing tanks from the fuselage bladder mid-flight. The mission was effectively a series of compromises. Range was prioritized entirely over defense, safety, and crew comfort. Each bomber became a unique, customized instrument of war tailored for one single, high-stakes flight of historical significance. The engineer's work was a desperate race against the clock, knowing that the window for a surprise attack was rapidly closing. The modifications were a testament to American ingenuity, pushing the very boundaries of aircraft capability in a time of dire national need. The mission required not just specialized aircraft, but highly motivated and exceptionally skilled crews willing to fly them. Doolittle personally selected 16 crews from the 17th Bomb Group, a total of 80 men, all of whom had volunteered for the extremely hazardous, secret duty. They were told only that the mission was critical, that it would be a prolonged assignment overseas, and that the chances of surviving were extremely low. Despite the dire warnings, the call for volunteers was met with immediate and widespread enthusiasm from the young American airmen. The intense training phase focused heavily on perfecting the technique for the short-field takeoff that the carrier deck required. Pilots practiced taking off from a simulated 500-foot runway, marked on a Florida airfield, with their fully loaded B-25s. They learned to use the absolute minimum amount of runway before yanking the control column back for the maximum possible lift. This practice was unforgiving, demanding perfect timing and coordination between the pilot and the co-pilot. The crews also drilled on low-altitude bombing techniques, as they would be flying at rooftop level to evade Japanese radar detection. Even during training, the true nature and target of the mission remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. The men only knew they were preparing for an operation that would fundamentally change the course of the fighting. Their morale was incredibly high, fueled by a collective desire to avenge the attack on Pearl Harbor and strike back at the enemy. Each crew member represented the absolute pinnacle of American aerial skill and patriotic determination. They were preparing for a historical moment that would forever define their generation and their service to the country. In early April 1942, the 16B 25 bombers were covertly hoisted aboard the deck of the USS Hornet in Alameda, California. The sight of the large, twin-engine, land-based bombers occupying the entire forward flight deck was completely unprecedented. The planes were so tightly packed and lashed down that they prevented the Hornet from conducting normal flight operations during the voyage. The carrier, accompanied by a small task force, then slipped silently out to sea and steamed westward across the vast Pacific Ocean. The secrecy of the mission was maintained even among the sailors and airmen aboard the ship for several long, tense days. The ship's crew believed they were simply ferrying the bombers to a new, distant base for the defense of another Allied outpost. It was only after the task force was deep into the Pacific that Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle officially revealed the true target. The news that they were going to bomb Tokyo sent a jolt of electrifying excitement and nervous anticipation through the entire force. The plan was to sail the carrier deep into enemy waters, to within 400 nautical miles of the Japanese coast. From that predetermined launch point, the B-25s would launch their one-way mission toward the undefended capital city. The carrier and its escort ships would immediately turn back and make a high-speed run for safety once the bombers were airborne. The whole operation was a razor-thin gamble, reliant on absolute surprise and perfect operational timing. The sheer logistical challenge of keeping the mission a secret while transporting such large, conspicuous cargo across the ocean was immense. Every mile sailed toward the launch point was a mile deeper into the dangerous and heavily patrolled Japanese sphere of influence. The entire operation depended on reaching the planned launch point completely undetected by any Japanese patrol vessel. However, just before dawn on April 18, 1942, the task force encountered the Japanese picket boat Nido Maru. Though the vessel was quickly sunk by the Hornet's escort cruisers, it managed to radio a warning back to the Japanese mainland. Doolittle and Admiral William Halsey instantly recognized that the critical element of surprise had been irrevocably lost. The Japanese would now be expecting an attack, though they would still be unsure of its exact timing or the type of aircraft involved. The agonizing decision was immediately made to launch the B-25s prematurely, over 170 miles farther from Japan than originally planned. This extra distance pushed the B-25s' already stretched fuel limits past their theoretical breaking point. The weather at that moment was violently uncooperative, with heavy swells causing the carrier deck to pitch and heave dangerously. Rain lashed down, and a strong, turbulent crosswind made the prospects of a clean takeoff highly questionable. Doolittle, as the mission's commander, climbed into the cockpit of the first bomber, determined to lead the way into the storm. He gunned the engines to full power, released the brakes, and rolled his heavy bomber down the short, wet deck. The nose pitched precariously over the bow before the plane finally gained lift. disappearing into the mist and the rough weather. One by one, the other 15 crews followed, each pilot performing a terrifying life-or-death high-wire act of skill and courage. The successful, albeit premature, launch of all 16 aircraft was a colossal achievement in the face of impossible odds. The planes were airborne and the mission was underway, now transformed from a risky venture into a near-certain suicide run. Hours after the carrier launch, the 16 B-25s began arriving over the Japanese home islands, flying in small groups. The radio warning from the sunken patrol boat had been misinterpreted or largely dismissed by the Japanese high command. They failed to adequately prepare air defenses, believing the alert referred to a few harmless reconnaissance aircraft. The sight of American twin-engine bombers, large and unmistakable, flying at treetop level over their capital was a profound shock. The airmen flew low to escape radar and to better target their objectives, giving the Japanese citizens below a terrifying view of the enemy. The crews could see people on the streets looking up in disbelief, a clear indication of the complete surprise of the attack. The bombers systematically hit predetermined military targets, including oil storage facilities, factories, and power plants. While the physical damage inflicted was not strategically crippling, the psychological effect on the nation was immediate and devastating. The myth of Tokyo's absolute safety, the strategic centerpiece of Japanese wartime confidence, was instantly and violently shattered. Citizens who had been assured of their geographic security were now faced with the undeniable reality of an enemy attack on their home. The American strike proved that the United States could, and would, reach the very heart of the Japanese Empire. The raid was designed to be a message, a powerful propaganda tool, and its success was immediate and overwhelming. It sent a clear signal that the Americans were far from defeated and were ready to retaliate with unimaginable boldness. The entire world learned the news almost immediately, and Allied morale soared in a stunning reversal of fortune. With their bomb loads released, the crews immediately executed the second, equally perilous part of their mission, the escape. They turned their B-25 southeast, aiming for the airfields in the Chinese provinces of Zhejiang and Jiangxi. The head start afforded by the premature launch was now a painful deficit, as every plane was dangerously low on fuel. The pilots were flying on fumes, battling the extra mileage, a lack of clear navigation, and deteriorating weather conditions. As darkness fell, the weather worsened dramatically, with thick fog and turbulent storm clouds obscuring all visual navigation points. The crews could not find the designated coastal airfields in the darkness and the heavy rain squalls. Doolittle, flying the lead aircraft, radioed his crews with the agonizing, inevitable order to bail out over unoccupied China. There was simply no fuel left for an organized landing attempt at any friendly or designated airfield. All of the remaining aircraft were doomed to crash land or be abandoned by their crews across the vast, mountainous terrain. This escape phase was a chaotic, disorganized, and desperate struggle for personal survival by the 80 men. They were now alone, parachuting into unknown territory, with the dual threat of injury and imminent Japanese capture looming. The success of the bombing run had given way to the grim realities of an impossible, one-way journey. The airmen were forced to sacrifice their planes, having successfully completed the part of the mission that mattered most. Of the 16 crews, 15 crash-landed or bailed out over the rugged terrain of eastern China. The crew of 1B-25, severely low on fuel, made the difficult decision to divert north and landed in the Soviet Union. The Soviets, remaining officially neutral in the Pacific conflict, promptly interned the four-man crew for the duration of the war. The majority of the airmen who came down in China were injured, exhausted, and initially completely lost in the unfamiliar territory. They faced immediate danger from Japanese patrols and the inherent hazards of parachuting into high mountain regions at night. Remarkably, most of the Doolittle airmen were quickly found and aided by friendly Chinese civilians and nationalist soldiers. The local Chinese population displayed extraordinary courage, hiding the Americans from Japanese search parties at great personal risk. A covert network of aid and safe houses was activated, moving the American flyers slowly toward nationalist-held territory. Tragically, 8 of the airmen were captured by the Japanese, of whom 3 were subsequently executed, as were criminals. The execution of American prisoners served as a grim footnote to the raid's success and drew international condemnation. The loss of all 16 aircraft was a small price for the mission's psychological and strategic achievements. Doolittle himself was rescued after parachuting into a rice paddy and initially feared the entire mission had failed due to the loss of his planes. The Doolittle Raid's long-term impact on the Pacific War was far greater than its limited physical damage suggested. The raid was a stunning, strategic victory that immediately reversed the tide of psychological momentum. It demonstrated conclusively that the Japanese homeland was vulnerable to American attack, no matter how distant. The humiliation led to a massive and immediate diversion of Japanese air and naval assets for the defense of the home islands. These defensive forces were desperately needed on the expanding frontiers of the Japanese Empire, where they were fighting crucial battles. The raid also had a direct, profound impact on Japanese planning for the decisive engagement at Midway. The Japanese High Command became fixated on eliminating the perceived forward air bases they believed must have been used for the attack. This paranoia led to the decision to seize Midway Island, which they believed would create a protective screen for their main fleet. The Battle of Midway, fought just 2 months after the raid, saw the destruction of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. This devastating loss of Japan's core naval air power was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. The Doolittle Raid, in effect, forced the Japanese into a high-risk, premature confrontation that they were not fully prepared to win. Jimmy Doolittle, initially believing he had failed, was instead promoted to brigadier general and awarded the Medal of Honor. His audacious mission single-handedly restored American pride, shattered Japanese complacency, and fundamentally changed the strategic calculus of the Pacific conflict.